Hi, I'm Diane Lucas,
And this is Mick, the Doctor of Digital.
and welcome to Sex 101. Sex 101 is created to empower our sexes and relationships. Another week, another great episode of Beyond Pleasure, reclaiming the meaning of sex in the age of self gratification.
This episode dives deep into the modern conversation about sexual wellness. We're responding to a recent viral piece, Redefining Pleasure, Exploring Sexual Wellness Trends for Ninth or 225, that champions autonomy, technology, and individualism in intimacy. The modern conversation often leaves out the most powerful framework for sexual flourishing, covenant commitment. We're going to explore how focusing on fidelity and other-centered love is not a retreat to the past, but a radical path to a future of true, enduring relational power.
Indeed, and Mr. Meg, the article leads with the idea of intimacy meets innovation, highlighting smart products. What is your cultural read on this trend of technological integration into the sexual space?
It's a fascinating and I think starting point because on the surface, who could argue against education or empowerment? But the deepest cultural current here is a profound shift from covenant to consumption and optimization. The articles focus on products, smart tools, apps, and devices, subtly but powerfully reframes the primary domain of sexuality from the relational, spiritual, and moral to the technical and the transactional. When we treat the body as a machine to be optimized and pleasure as a product to be consumed, we inevitably diminish the mysterious, deeply personal act of self giving. Ancient wisdom traditions, especially the Judeo Christian worldview, anchor sexuality not in a device, but in an other oriented covenantal relationship. Think of the opening pages of the Bible. Genesis describes marriage as a one flesh union, a foundational act of self giving and mutual commitment before any mention of procreation or pleasure. This act isn't enhanced by an external tool. It is realized internally through the surrender of two autonomous wills into a singular dedicated purpose. The covenant is the technology. When we turn to the New Testament, St. Paul, addressing the Corinthians, a culture saturated with various forms of commodified and casual sex, doesn't suggest better tech. He calls for a radical self control and mutual commitment, urging husbands and wives to view their bodies as belonging to each other. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. 1 Corinthians 7:4. This isn't about subjugation, it's about radical mutuality and accountability within a covenant. The mechanism of that union is the vulnerability and unwavering faithfulness of the partners themselves. The risk with the smart products trend is that it promotes a view of pleasure as a problem to be solved or an experience to be optimized by an external mechanism. It privatizes and individualizes what is, in its highest form, a shared relational mystery. Clement of Alexandria, one of the early church fathers, was acutely concerned with how Christians should navigate the luxury and excess of his time. He advocated for a life of simple, purposeful living, critiquing indulgence that prioritize individual gratification over the higher goods of virtual and communal life. When a couple relies on technology to mediate or enhance their bond, they introduce a third party, however non human, that detracts from this total naked dependence of two committed souls to each other. Psychological research strongly supports this ancient preference for commitment over optimization. Studies on pair bonding, the deep, enduring attachment typical of human long term relationships, shows it's facilitated by neurochemicals like oxytocin and vasopressin. Crucially, the release of these bonding agents is most robustly tied not merely to physical acts, but to shared emotional experience, security, and sustained commitment. Dr. Sue Johnson's work in emotionally focused therapy, EFT, affirms that long term satisfaction is fundamentally about safety and secure attachment, the emotional certainty that your partner will be there for you. This security is the antithesis of a transient, technologically mediated encounter. The tech trend risks creating a solo pursuit of peak sensation instead of a shared journey towards secure connection. undermining the very mechanisms that create lasting, satisfying intimacy. The pursuit of the perfect experience via technology can lead to a condition known as relationship perfectionism, where partners become constantly disappointed by the gap between the idealized, technologically enhanced fantasy and the messy, beautiful reality of human love. This relentless pursuit of the next innovation betrays a profound lack of faith in the sufficient grace of the covenant itself. In conclusion, the turn towards sexual technology replaces the demanding work of covenant and secure attachment with the allure of private consumption and optimized pleasure, thus shifting the domain of sexuality from relational fidelity to technical expertise.
Mr. Mick, is the traditional framework inherently opposed to pleasure or self care? How should we understand this push toward pleasure as an individualized self care practice?
This is where we need to be incredibly nuanced because traditional wisdom is not anti pleasure, it is anti disordered and isolated pleasure. The ancient Jewish tradition, for instance, celebrates sexuality within its proper context. The Song of Solomon is an exquisite sensual celebration of desire and physical beauty between lovers. It is the very presence of the other, the beloved, that makes the pleasure sacred and beautiful. The pleasure is not purely for the self, it is shared, and its meaning is intrinsically linked to the covenant the couple embodies. The problem with the modern sexual wellness as self care framing is its isolationism. It isolates the self and the experience of pleasure from the demands of relationship and commitment. When the article talks about reframing sexual wellness as an indulgent, nurturing experience, it often leans into a definition of self care that is fundamentally self referential and borders on narcissism. It encourages a view of the body as an instrument for private sensation rather than a gift to be offered in a committed, other centered exchange. It inadvertently reinforces the autonomous self, which is the very thing covenant marriage seeks to dismantle and reconstruct into a union. Ancient philosophers and theologians understood the true flourishing. Eudaimonia, it's in Aristotelian terms, wasn't achieved through maximum pleasure, but through virtue and ordered living. That's happiness. The Stoics, like Epictetus, taught that freedom comes from mastering one's desires, not indulging them, while the Christian view refines this by integrating the body's goodness and affirming pleasure within marriage. It retains the core idea that true fulfillment requires discipline and direction. Augustine of Hippo, reflecting on human nature, argued that the inclination to self centered desire is a fundamentally human condition that distorts our relationality. He saw the primary goods of marriage as fidelity, offspring, and the sacramental bond. Pleasure, for Augustine, was a good and necessary part of the union, but it was subordinate to the primary goods of covenant and relationship. When pleasure is elevated to the highest good, the core of self care, it tends to devour the very relational structures that give it lasting, meaningful context. The pleasure becomes an end in itself rather than as a seal of the committed union. Contemporary psychology validates the concern about isolated self focus. Research on marital commitment and long term satisfaction, like those conducted by scholars such as Dr. Scott Stanley and Dr. Howard Markman, consistently shows that relationship success is less about individual fulfillment and more about sacrifice, dedication, and the intentional relinquishment of options. A self care practice that habitually prioritizes solo pleasure risks reinforcing an individualistic script that is ill equipped for the compromises and costly love required by a lifelong partnership. Secure long term pair bonding is built on mutual care and other centered giving, not on the relentless pursuit of individual indulgence. We see in studies on unilateral decision making in relationships that even small acts prioritizing self over partnership, like spending money or defining intimacy on one's own terms, lead to measurable declines in relational satisfaction. The truest form of sexual self care in a covenant is the care taken to protect and deepen the bond with the other person, often through acts of vulnerability and self denial. In conclusion, while traditional wisdom affirms pleasure, it firmly subordinates it to the higher good of covenant, recognizing that individual pleasure becomes truly meaningful and sustainable only when contextualized within a framework of other oriented lifelong commitment, a view supported by psychological studies on marital stability.
Mr. Mick, is open conversation inherently good, or do you see a downside in the social media normalization of intimacy decisions outside of a theological or moral context?
The impulse to break down genuine toxic shame, the kind that breeds secrecy and isolates people in their struggles, is certainly good. The early church, in fact, was revolutionary in its care for the marginalized and its teaching on sexual integrity, and often intended to protect people from the shame and exploitation of the surrounding culture. We want to remove false shame, which is the self condemnation for being human, but we must preserve the proper sense of awe and reverence for the sacredness of the sexual act. However, we need to distinguish between destigmatization and decontextualization. The current media landscape often conflates genuine moral and relational integrity with oppressive taboo. By normalizing and making everything shareable, social media risks strip mining intimacy of its sacred, private, and covenantal context. When every aspect of the sexual experience, including deeply personal feelings and desires, becomes a public discussion point, a topic for a quick hit podcast segment, or a trending hashtag, it fundamentally alters the purpose of the conversation. The space of intimacy is transmuted from a sanctuary to a stage. Ancient wisdom traditions placed a high value on modesty and discretion, what the Greeks called eidos, not a means of generating shame, but as a safeguard for the sanctity of the relational bond. Tertullian, writing on the importance of chastity, modesty, viewed it as a virtue that protected the dignity of the body and the integrity of the marriage bond. It was a way of saying, this is precious and therefore it is private. When the sacred space of intimacy is forced into the public square for the sake of normalization, its distinctiveness and spiritual depth are inevitably diluted. Intimacy requires a walled garden, a private space protected from the eyes and noise of the world to flourish. The Hebrew wisdom tradition, particularly the book of Proverbs, is constantly warning against the loose tongue and the pitfalls of unrestrained communication. For example, it warns against the man who reveals secrets, Proverbs 11:13. True wisdom involves discerning when to speak and when to be silent, when to share and when to keep a sacred trust, particularly concerning the bond that defines the marital unity. Psychologically, the public decontextualization can be deeply destabilizing. Studies in attachment theory, pioneered by figures like John Bowlby and later advanced by others, show that security and trust in a partnership are built on exclusivity and a boundary of privacy outside against the outside world. The marriage bed is, by design, an exclusive space. When conversations about intimate details are routinely broadcast to a mass anonymous audience, it can undermine the didactic integrity of the couple. The boundary that defines us against them begins to erode, and with it, the emotional security of the bond. Moreover, social comparison, a known driver of anxiety and dissatisfaction, amplified by social media, enters the bedroom. Listeners and readers are implicitly encouraged to measure their own relationship against an often curated or overly generalized narrative, leading not to empowerment, but to a relational insecurity and a sense of perpetual inadequacy. The deepest kind of support comes not from a million anonymous listeners, but the singular, trustworthy, covenanted partner. In conclusion, while the goal of alleviating genuine shame is commendable, the social media normalization of intimacy risks decontextualizing the sexual experience from its covenantal and private integrity, a risk that psychologically undermines the exclusivity and security essential for deep, lasting pair bonding.
Fair bonding for sure. Mr. Mick, how does the ancient conventional perspective approach time and desire differently? And how does this contrast with the modern pursuit of instant gratification?
And that's an essential distinction, and it cuts to the heart of the Christian worldview, which is fundamentally eschatological, focused on the ultimate eternal future. Modern sexual wellness operates on the principle of immediate fulfillment, It's here, now, and accessible through a purchase or a mindset shift. The covenantal view, however, is a framework of patient transcendent. True relational fulfillment is a process, a pilgrimage, achieved over decades through the patient work of fidelity marked by cycles of struggle and reconciliation. Ancient philosophers understood the necessity of delay. Plato, in his dialogues, constantly emphasizes the need for reason to govern appetite. The wise person is the one who can wait, who can defer immediate gratification for a greater, more ordered good. The philosophical discipline of temperance was fully integrated into early Christian thought. The pastoral letters, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, reportedly call for self control and patience as core virtues for leaders and lay people alike. This wasn't Puritanism, it was a relational strategy. The difference comes down to the nature of desire. In the covenantal view, desire is not merely a need to be immediately met, but a spiritual energy to be disciplined and directed towards the permanent good of the partner. The delay, the exclusivity, and the unending nature of the marriage vow create a friction that paradoxically deepens the eventual union. John Chrysostom said the purpose of marriage was not for pleasure, but for the procreation of children and for the avoidance of unchastity. But its true emphasis was on mutual forbearance, the patient endurance of each other's flaws as the engine of sanctification. The act of waiting and choosing fidelity every day is the true crucible of love. Psychologically, this ancient wisdom is powerfully affirmed by the study of delayed gratification and long term commitment. The landmark marshmallow test demonstrated that the ability to delay gratification is a powerful predictor of future success. In relationships, this translates into what psychologists call longitudinal dedication. The work of Dr. Scott Stanley and the sliding versus deciding model is highly relevant. He shows that couples who intentionally decide to commit and build hedges around their relationship rather than passively sliding into deeper involvement experience greater stability and higher satisfaction over the long term. The covenant is the ultimate deciding mechanism. It removes the option of sliding out when things get difficult. In conclusion, the covenantal framework provides a superior pathway to relational satisfaction by demanding the virtue of patience, which directs sexual desire towards the permanent good of lifelong commitment, contrasting sharply with the immediate gratification promised by modern trends and creating the essential psychological stability required for true long term flourishing.
Mr. Mick, how does the ancient convent or covenantal perspective approach time and desire differently? And how does this contrast with the modern pursuit of instant gratification?
And in that sense, where we say and we think about what the ancients have to say is on really what we would talk about when we describe the church fathers drawing from the synthesis of biblical thought and the best of ancient philosophy. We're deeply concerned with the integration of the person. Gregory of Nyssa, for instance, emphasized that the human being is made in the image of God, and this image is only fully realized through the harmonious unity of soul and body. The body is not a cage, as some extreme Gnostics taught, but an integral part of the person, destined for resurrection. Therefore, sexual acts must reflect this high dignity and the eternal purpose of the person. Unrestricted or non covenantal sex dishonors the body because it treats it as a separate temporal body and source of gratification rather than as a temple of the Holy Spirit and intended for an eternal union. The difference between the tall hill holisms is clearest in the application. The article suggests mindfulness practices and body positive affirmations focused on self acceptance and pleasure. The traditional covenantal view suggests mindfulness of the other and affirmations of covenantal fidelity. The focus shifts from how does my body feel and what does it need to how can I love and serve my covenanted partner. This is sacramental anthropology of Christianity. The body and its acts are seen as signs of greater reality, the total irrevocable gift of self. The body positive affirmation of the covenant is your body is a gift I promise to honor, protect, and cherish exclusively until death separates us. This is far more profound than an affirmation of simple self acceptance. Contemporary psychological research strongly affirms the relational benefit of this other centered approach. Studies on marital quality by researchers like Dr. John Gottman highlight that the key to a flourishing relationship isn't personal fulfillment, but the consistent pattern of turning toward the partner's bids for connection, cultivating positive sentiment override, and maintaining a high ratio of positive to negative interactions. When a person intentionally focuses their emotional energy on serving their partner, they indirectly create the safest environment for their own holistic health. Aristotle's idea of virtue as the mean between extremes, a concept that informed theologians like Thomas Aquinas later, suggests that our desires are good when rightly ordered, but destructive when they become tyrannical. Christian ethics simply places the ultimate ordering principle of sexuality not within the self's desires, but within the covenantal structure of marriage designed by God. True holistic health in this context means the body, mind, and soul are aligned not with individual appetite, but with the eternal demands of a love that is faithful, fruitful, and forever. In conclusion, while both frameworks embrace holism, the modern therapeutic model aims at individual optimization and self fulfillment, whereas the Judeo Christian model integrates the person towards the end of other oriented love, covenant fidelity, and communal flourishing, a relational focus strongly validated by attachment and marital research.
So, Mr. Mick, how does a Judeo-Christian view of the whole person, which is emphasizes the integration of the body and soul, differ from this modern therapeutic holism?
In this case, this is the important and most complex point of tension as it touches on profound theological and anthropological claims. The contemporary push for inclusivity is driven by a genuine desire for compassion and the alleviation of suffering, something the church has always been called to do. However, the type of inclusivity being discussed here, one that seeks to normalize and validate all sexual expressions and relationship structures, is in direct tension with the Judeo Christian tradition's anthropological claims about the desire and design and purpose of human sexuality. The core counterpoint here is between radical inclusivity and covenantal exclusivity. The traditional framework is exclusive by design. It limits the full expression of sexual intimacy to the lifelong procreative union of one man and one woman. This is not an arbitrary restriction, it's an affirmation of the profound, unique, and necessary complementarity inherent in the male female pair bond, which alone has the capacity to embody one flesh mystery and serve as the stable, self perpetuating unit for society. This exclusivity creates a uniquely secure context. Jewish wisdom traditions emphasize the covenant of marriage as a relationship of unique spiritual significance. The prophets often use the metaphor of marriage to describe God's own covenant with Israel. The early church fathers, particularly John Chrysostom, celebrated marriage not just for procreation, but as a school of love and a cure for loneliness. For Chrysostom, the primary goal of the marital relationship was the sanctification of the spouses, the cultivation of virtue through the demanding work of lifelong self giving love. The specific structure of man and woman was seen as the necessary container for a love that had a unique power to form both persons into the image of Christ's love for the church. The structure provides the necessary teleological or end boundaries for human flourishing. Psychologically, the case for the unique strength of the committed, exclusive pair bond is overwhelming. Research on pair bonding demonstrates that the intense, enduring bond is predicted and predicated on exclusivity. Dr. Helen Fisher's work on the neurobiology of love details the three stages: lust, attraction, and attachment, where attachment, the drive for long term pair bonding, is marked by a clear preference for a single partner. Studies on the benefits of monogamy in humans show correlations with reduced stress hormones and increased emotional stability for both partners. The stability of the exclusive covenant provides a non negotiable foundation for social continuity. The traditional framework maintains that covenant fidelity, expressed in the exclusive lifelong marriage of a man and a woman, remains the ideal and normative context for sexual expression and human flourishing. It is precisely the exclusivity and difficulty of this demanding covenant that generate the profound security, intimacy, and stability that research identifies as the cornerstones of long term human happiness. To redefine the terms of the covenant out of an impulse for inclusivity is to fundamentally compromise the very mechanism, the exclusivity of the pair bond that yields its greatest psychological and social benefits. The traditional ethic, while exclusive in its definition of the sexual act, is universally inclusive in its call to virtue, chastity, and self love for all people, regardless of their state in life. In conclusion, while the ethical call for compassion and support for all people is paramount, the Judeo Christian tradition maintains that a specific anthropological claim regarding the exclusive complementary pair bond is the essential non negotiable container for sexual expression that yields the greatest human and social flourishing. A claim strongly supported by neurobiological and sociological research on pair bonding and child stability.
So, Mr. Mick, the final rallying cry is pleasure is power. For those in our audience drawn to this modern, self defined empowerment, how do we present a conventional framework as the true path to a deeper, more enduring from empowerment and fearlessness?
The modern definition of empowerment is essentially autonomy and self determination, the power to define one's own reality and fulfill one's own desires. This is a very low risk definition of power because it always preserves the option to retreat when difficulty arises. It emphasizes freedom from constraints. The covenantal framework offers a radically different and infinitely more profound definition of power, the power of self giving, sustained fidelity, and costly love. This is the power to bind oneself to the good of the other forever. When the article states pleasure is power, it means that transient self directed sensation is power. The traditional response is that enduring self sacrificial love is the highest power. It's the difference between a fleeting feeling and a permanent, unshakable reality. The true fearlessness we should seek is not the fearlessness to break taboos, but the fearlessness to commit without an exit strategy. This is a psychological and spiritual deep dive that modern trends, with their emphasis on options and constant redefinition, actively discourage. Covenant commitment is the true source of power for three reasons. One, it conquers attachment anxiety. The commitment required by the Judeo Christian model is the absolute lifelong guarantee that provides the secure base necessary for mature adult attachment. Researchers in attachment theory have shown that when individuals know their partner is predictably and unconditionally available, they gain the emotional freedom to pursue their personal goals and engage the world with confidence. The fearlessness the article seeks is truly achieved when the partner's love is seen as a covenantal promise, not a conditional arrangement. When the option to leave is removed, the couple is forced to engage in the necessary work of repair and growth. The power lies in its irrevocability. Two, it creates psychological resilience. A marriage built on the New Testament model of agape love, a love of choice, will, and service, is uniquely equipped to weather the inevitable crises of a life together. The Pauline epistles, particularly the metaphor of Christ in the church, define this love as an intentional act of self abandonment for the partner's good. Dr. Stanley's work on dedication commitment versus constraint commitment shows that relationships thrive when they are rooted in the positive choice to dedicate oneself to the future of the relationship rather than merely the negative feeling of being constrained by obligation. The covenantal framework is dedicated, committed, institutionalized, and divinized. It provides the motivational structure to push through inevitable disillusionment. Three, it honors the dignity of the body. The Christian ethic, particularly as articulated by the early fathers like Augustine and John Chrysostom, views the body as a sacred part of the person created for union. The sexual act, when contained within the covenant, is an act that honors the whole person, soul, body, and future of the beloved. This is true empowerment to treat your own and your partner's sexuality not as a recreational commodity, but as a sacrament of enduring fidelity. The power of covenant is the power to declare, you are enough, and I am here forever. This declaration is the most potent affirmation available in human relationships, transcending any temporary affirmation or technological enhancement. It is the power that secures human connection against the inevitable forces of cultural decay and personal frailty. In conclusion, while the modern trends promise autonomy and fearlessness through self defined pleasure, the covenantal framework offers a deeper and more durable empowerment rooted in the self giving fidelity of lifelong commitment, a radical choice that conquers attachment anxiety and provides the unshakable security required for true human flourishing.
Mr. Meg, to wrap up, a modern sexual wellness movement aims at wellness. What is the final ultimate goal of the covenantal framework? And what is the single most important lesson our listeners and readers should take away about finding true satisfaction?
The modern sexual wellness movement, despite all its talk of holism and empowerment, ultimately remains focused on a goal of personal comfort and transient fulfillment, a pursuit of wellness in this life alone. It is a philosophy of immanence. The ultimate goal of the covenantal framework, however, is holiness and relational transformation. The ultimate end, the telos, is not simply personal feeling, but becoming a person capable of self transcendent, unconditional love, a love that mirrors the divine love for humanity. The single most important lesson for finding true, lasting satisfaction is this: stop viewing your partner and your relationship as a source of personal fulfillment and start viewing yourself as a source of your partner's security and well being. When you focus on giving security, on being the unfailing secure base, you're embodying the covenant. And that act of giving paradoxically produces the deepest psychological rewards for yourself. Studies on pro social behavior consistently show that acts of altruism and dedication to others are far more powerful predictors of individual long term happiness and life satisfaction than acts of self indulgence. The Christian sexual ethic is, therefore, the most profound form of relational prosocial behavior imaginable. In conclusion, the path to true sexual and relational satisfaction lies not in pursuing wellness through transient products and self centered pleasure, but in embracing the demanding, self transcendent, and utterly secure power of a lifelong covenant dedicated to the holiness and security of the covenanted partner.
Indeed, Mr. Mick, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Indeed, an era where sex often reduced to fleeting pleasure and instant self gratification, reclaiming its deeper meaning, calls for return to intimacy, connection, and purpose. Mr. Meg, would you like to plug in something?
Sure, I appreciate it. Write the book, grow the business. Connect on LinkedIn, GMIC, the Dr. Digital Smith, PhD. Also pick up a couple of volumes on Amazon, Burning America and On Track Ian Hunter. And of course, listen to the Dr. Digital podcast.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Make the Doctor Digital because if you support him for more and more empowering episodes and more empowering authors will rise. And please do listen to our baby podcast, people, baby podcast, Mental Health 101. Mental Health 101 is created to empower our mental health awareness. So, Mr. Mike, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, my friend. Until next time, Deus Volt.
More to come, people. See you soon.